it wouldn't be a day in my life without some technical difficulties. So I hope that you all can hear me now, if anybody has tuned in yet, and can confirm that these headphones are allowing you to hear me. That would be great. If you can hear me, comment in the chat. Hell yeah. All right. So round 3 for the live video on week 3. Welcome to Wednesday of week 3 of the 6 and 6 campaign, where I am embarking on studying and taking all 6 Areys in 6 weeks. Just to reiterate, for those of you that may have missed past videos or past announcements, this campaign is geared towards highlighting the scope of the Areys for all of you and really getting into some of the resources and exposing what it's like to actually go in and take an exam, hopefully encourage all of you to embark on your path to licensure, but definitely not doing it in 6 weeks like I'm doing it. This is definitely not a model that is exactly replicable, but I'm hoping that all the resources and insight that I'm basically discovering can be utilized for you as you apply it to whatever study path that you decide to go on. So tonight, I wanted to take a deeper dive into the difference between project planning and design, which was the exam that I took last week, and project development and documentation, which is the exam that I'm studying for and taking this week. Before I do that, though, I wanted to clarify one thing that's come to surface for me while talking to some of my peers and some people that have actually been responding to some of these videos, is that there's a really inherent difference between studying for the Arey while you're actually working at an architecture firm versus studying for the Arey when you're not working at an architecture firm. Because when you're currently practicing at an architecture firm and studying for your exams, you're actually able to go into work the next day and see how what you're learning is actually being incorporated into the design process there. You might actually even be able to apply it to whatever you're currently working on. I, on the other hand, for those that don't know, am working at the AIS office. So that's a very different kind of mentality. And it's really fascinating hearing from my friends how actually working at a firm can really help you not only be able to apply what you're learning, but actually see firsthand how studying for and hopefully inevitably passing your Areys can really make you a better architect and can help you practice architecture and be able to actually maintain the health, safety, welfare of the public. So besides that, I'm still on this campaign, and maybe I'm actually excited to see how in the future, when I, for instance, restudy and retake the last 2 exams and any other ones that I fail, I'm excited to see how that will actually apply to my practice on the day-to-day and in the long term. But yeah, so without further ado, I wanted to go into the differences between Ppd and Pdd, and those are short-term lingo that you'll probably all get used to when you're also on this path and are reading endless blogs and things about this. So first of all, I wanted to highlight that NCARB actually has a blog, in case you weren't aware, and on this blog, they start to illustrate just how integrated and interconnected project planning and design and product development and documentation are. These 2 exams, just like project management and practice management, are really closely related, and it's highly recommended that you study for both in either consecutively or at the same time, because a lot of the material is the same. So project planning and design, which is the one I did last week, focuses on more of the preliminary design of your sites and buildings. You can start to see some of the sections that are covered in Ppd. And what I like about this blog is they actually call out that a keyword to describe this division is selection. And by that, they mean being able to select the appropriate systems, whether that's HVAC or elevator or electrical or even just wall type or structural type for a building given a particular program, site context, or any other detail. Whereas project development and documentation focuses more on the integration and detailing of those systems. So you obviously have to know all of the same things from project planning and design and have a really good understanding of those systems, those materials and assemblies. But here they really illustrate that the keyword for this section is integration. Being able to integrate not only all of the codes and all of the program elements, but being able to integrate all these systems and actually figure out how to detail them. Being able to even go past these systems and going into project documentation. What does it mean to put together a drawing set? Is there an order that they should be in? How do you label them? All of those things are incorporated into this exam. So I also wanted to share another few sets of resources. First of all, when you go to the Pass the Arey page on the NCARB website, you'll see that they have a number of resources, but right at the top, it says looking for study materials, and then you can actually scroll, and you'll find that eventually you can find a data and resources page. And this has more or less a bunch of videos illustrating the different types of item types in Arey 5.0 that are new from 4.0, so the drag and place item type, hotspot, etc. But one document that I want to call attention to is the Arey 5.0 test specification. So when you go into this document, you see that it basically illustrates, just like the Arey 5.0 handbook, it starts to touch into all the different content areas, sections, the measurement objectives for those sections, the percentage of content coverage, and all that other stuff. And the reason I'm going into this is because I want to highlight that not only do PPD and PDD have fundamental differences in how you're actually thinking about the project, where they are in terms of a project phase, where they are in terms of content differences, but the way that the exam is actually quizzing you is inherently different. So you can see there's different types of cognitive complexity that go into all of the different sections when NCARB is putting together these exams. The three critical ones are remember, which is basically fundamental retrieval of information. All of the questions assume that you have all that information and that you can remember it. But the way that Arey 5.0 goes beyond remembering is into understanding and applying and analyzing and evaluating. And these two are really different because understanding and applying basically involves standard mental processing, whereas analyzing and evaluating involves non-standard or non-predictive mental processing. That's where you go beyond simply putting together all these pieces, and you actually have to think critically and sometimes strategically. And when you go down and look at, for instance, PPD, which was the one that I took last week, you start to see that a majority of that is analyze and evaluate. And I'm realizing that obviously I only had 1 week to try and study and take this exam, but the fact that a majority of that involved that capacity beyond simple mental capacity, I think actually had something to do with how I did on the exam and the fact that it was really difficult. But then when you scroll down into project development and documentation, I think just by nature, since it deals more with specifics and it deals with actual documents and all of those details, you start to notice that it has a lot more of the understand and assess. And so I think that that inherent difference is really critical to understand in terms of differentiating between PPD and PDD. And I encourage you all to look through this document a little more to see just how NCARB will be testing you with regards to all these different subject matters. And then I just wanted to once again touch in on my experience so that you guys can actually see where I'm coming from with regards to all of these exams. For both PPD and PDD, I don't have too many hours in comparison to what is actually required. And when you zoom into PDD, I had experience at 3 different firms in 3 different cities. And the reason I'm calling attention to that is because something I'm learning while studying for PDD is that documentation actually has a really strict and legal implication with regards to the order of the drawings, how you're labeling them. However, when you're working at a firm, you'll learn that sometimes they actually differ from that standard, whether it's regional or just firm specific. And sometimes that can actually impact your ability to take this exam and look at the holistic view of it. So when I'm studying for this, I'm trying to kind of forget the little nitty-gritty details and differences of all those firms and really focus in on what is the critical method of documenting a project and how does NCARB really want you to understand that. So if you, for instance, go out and start your own firm after becoming an architect, that you'll be able to do that not only well, but in accordance with legal standards. So after that, I wanted to share another resource that I think a lot of you might actually already know about, perhaps studying for your environmental course, perhaps studying for your structures course, but this resource is pretty handy, so let's dive in. Welcome to the Architecture Toolbox. This is an awesome reference page that has a lot of different tools for representation, materials and systems, and even career planning, project management, and other things. I'm going to zoom in a little bit primarily on representation and materials and systems because this is actually helping me get into a little bit more of a detailed understanding of what this exam could actually be testing me on, and just actually being able to zoom in on construction documents because I don't have too much information on it, and some other stuff that I'll get into. So for instance, when you go into representation, you can go into graphics and find some really awesome blogs and pages that show you how to actually number your construction documents, what order they go in, all of those details. And then beyond that, they have actual symbols that you can start to read. Because on project development and documentation, you will have to be able to go through a set of drawings and discern what's wrong with them, where things should be illustrated, and be able to read them really quickly. So you'll obviously have to understand all of these symbols and what they mean. And I'm just going to show you one example. So for architecture floor plans, hopefully a lot of you are already familiar with these, but even just symbols like the difference between a building section and a wall section, the difference between a detail section or an overall section, the column grid callout, all of these things that are really fundamental in practicing architecture and creating these drawing sets that are not only legible to you and your fellow peers in an architecture firm, but are legible for a contractor and a construction manager and anybody else working on the project. That's why these are all really consistent, and they actually have to follow these different regulations and systems because so many different bodies will be reading your drawings and they have to be able to read them clearly and effectively. Some other pages on this website that I think are really handy that I've been looking at, just like a few of the other resources I've shared in the last few weeks, they also share some free online building code references. So you can go here to see the IBC as well as ADA codes, some mechanical codes, fire protection codes, all of that good stuff. And that's all on here at your convenience. So I found that really helpful. And then they also have sections on materials and systems. Just like last week, you really have to understand the difference between, or the actual impact that your material choice and system choice is having on a building. Whether the scale of the building determines that material choice or system choice, whether the span of your ideal structural system could impact that, whether the loads of the program, all of that really comes into play here. And you can see that this website kind of illustrates some sample shapes of materials, some nominal dimensions, which are not necessarily the actual dimensions. Fun fact, nominal can actually generally be an oversimplification. So like a 2x4 wood beam is actually 1.5 inches by 3.5 inches. That's just a little fun fact for you all. So yeah, you can go in here and find some shapes of different materials. You can read about their impact on fire and other things. We'll go over to concrete because I think another thing that's really helpful on here is that they have a blog particularly focused on steel reinforcement. And that helps you just understand the different types of steel reinforcing, and even the fact that perhaps on the exam they might require you to know that the bar size correlates to the diameter, where each number is 1/8 of an inch to the diameter of that bar. So number 3 is 3/8 of an inch, number 4 is 4/8 of an inch. All these little fun facts that you might think you might not need to know, but that you'll definitely feel more confident going into the exam. And I already feel a little better just looking at all of these and making sure that you get to that detail level of understanding where you can really apply your knowledge. They also have pages illustrating some information on thermal and moisture protection. And in here, you'll see that one of my favorite pages, which is probably how a lot of you may have already found this website, is the R values page. This just gives you a little understanding of what exactly an R value is, the fact that it's an inverse of a U factor, and then it has an awesome table where you can start to get a feel for all of those R values for different materials in an assembly. And in the exam, they're probably going to provide you with a table. You probably will not have to memorize this, but it's definitely useful to just get an understanding. Like, is your structural member, how resistant is that to thermal bridging? How resistant is insulation to actually keeping air and perhaps moisture out of your building? And this table is really just helpful at getting into that detail, getting an understanding, so that when you go into the exam, you'll be able to find it on that chart and you'll kind of already anticipate which assembly is perhaps more resistant than another one. A couple others, they also have a page on some different HVAC systems and information, so you can go in and see the basics of heating and cooling, which goes into whether it's conduction or convection or radiation, and then they give you a really awesome sample diagram of a cooling system. This is one of my favorite things, and I'm sorry for being a nerd. I personally love refrigerant systems. But yeah, if you just are really confused and might need to zoom in on a diagram, they have that here for you, and you really need to understand what exactly is going on in these systems. It's not about memorizing these diagrams and memorizing these graphics. It's about getting to that deeper level of understanding. What's actually happening to the refrigerant when it's going through that compressor? How is it getting hot? And all of that good stuff. What is the fan doing? Being able to understand that will help you get further and help you apply your knowledge in the exam. A couple more before I end off for the evening. They even go into some duct shaft layouts. This might be a little bit more detailed than, for instance, you'd need in PPD, but I definitely am anticipating some questions that even perhaps get into this level of detail in PDD, where you're zooming in and you're trying to see the impact of your HVAC system on the overall space of your building. Whether that duct system is really deep and actually is causing your floor-to-floor height to be minimized, or whether you can move it out of a plenum, for instance, and save some space to actually really utilize that floor-to-floor height. And so getting in here, you can start to really, really hone in on those details, get into that deeper level of understanding of all of these systems. And they even have a fire suppression page, which, if you've been paying attention to my videos, is a weakness of mine. So I'll be spending some time here, and hopefully I'll find some more resources on fire suppression to share with all of you. If you're like me, and you're just having trouble figuring out exactly how many, what exact hour rating your walls need and how to separate those between occupancies. But yeah, so that was just a little overview of the difference between PPD and PDD. And maybe if you haven't already been exposed to the Architecture Toolbox, hopefully you now love it and are bookmarking it, because personally, I've loved it for years, and I didn't actually realize how useful it would be for the Areys. I didn't know just how much detail and how many different systems they had on here. So yeah, hopefully this video was helpful. I apologize for those of you that went through the technical difficulties with me, but you know, just another day in the life. All right, see you guys on Friday when I go in to take the exam. Bye.